Sometimes the biggest mistake a person can make isn't breaking the law. It's assuming they already know who deserves its protection. The sharp click of handcuffs echoed through the quiet suburban street just after sunrise, slicing through the peaceful morning like a sound that didn't belong. Neighbors paused halfway through walking their dogs. A lawn sprinkler continued its steady rhythm across a neatly trimmed yard as if the neighborhood itself refused to acknowledge what was unfolding. Standing beside a dark blue SUV parked in the driveway of a modest brick home was a tall black man wearing a navy windbreaker, pressed khaki pants, and polished brown shoes. His expression remained calm despite the tense voices surrounding him. He neither argued nor raised his hands in frustration. Instead, he looked directly at the white police officer fastening the cuffs around his wrists with the steady composure of someone who had learned long ago that dignity often speaks louder than anger. Officer Ethan Walker believed he had everything under control. The anonymous report had sounded convincing enough. Suspicious individual. Possible stolen vehicle. Unverified resident. In his mind, the pieces fit together before he had even stepped out of his patrol car. The expensive SUV parked outside a quiet neighborhood home. The unfamiliar face. The confidence that, to him, seemed misplaced. Every assumption quietly reinforced the one before it. Around them, curtains shifted behind windows as curious eyes watched the encounter unfold. A teenager across the street discreetly lifted a phone and began recording. An elderly couple paused at the edge of the sidewalk, exchanging uncertain glances but saying nothing. The cool Virginia air carried only the distant hum of traffic and the soft rustling of oak trees lining the street. The man finally spoke, his voice measured, respectful, almost surprisingly gentle. "Officer, there has been a misunderstanding." Ethan barely looked at him. "You can explain everything downtown." The man nodded slowly, not in surrender but in patience. "May I ask you to contact your supervisor before this goes any further?" Ethan gave a short, dismissive laugh. "That's not how this works." The man lowered his eyes for only a moment before looking back up. There was no fear in them. No resentment. Only an unsettling calm that somehow made the officer even more certain he was right. The teenager filming whispered to a friend, "Why isn't he fighting this?" No one noticed the phone vibrating inside the man's jacket pocket. The screen lit up once, then again, and again. The caller ID simply displayed one word. Headquarters. Across town, several secure government lines began ringing almost simultaneously. A conference room in Washington fell unexpectedly silent. A digital map flashed with a location marker that had suddenly stopped moving. Without hesitation, conversations ended mid-sentence. Chairs slid backward. Black SUVs started their engines. Back on the quiet residential street, Officer Walker guided the man toward the patrol vehicle, convinced the situation was already finished. He had no idea it had only just begun. Officer Ethan Walker closed the rear door of the patrol vehicle with quiet satisfaction, convinced the morning had taken exactly the turn he expected. The man seated inside remained remarkably composed, his hands resting loosely in front of him, his breathing slow and steady, as though the situation unfolding around him belonged to someone else. That calm unsettled Ethan far more than panic ever could. Most people protested. Most demanded answers. Most became emotional the moment steel cuffs touched their wrists. This man simply watched the neighborhood through the window with thoughtful eyes, almost as if he were memorizing every detail. Across the street, more neighbors gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed voices while pretending not to stare. A young mother gently guided her children toward the sidewalk, casting one last uncertain glance before continuing her morning walk. An older gentleman folded his newspaper under one arm and quietly shook his head, unable to decide whether he had just witnessed excellent police work or something that did not feel quite right. Ethan climbed into the driver's seat and reached for the radio microphone. Before he could speak, dispatch interrupted with another routine update unrelated to the stop. He responded briefly, then glanced into the rearview mirror. Their eyes met for only a second. The man offered a polite smile that somehow made Ethan feel as though he were the one being evaluated. You still have time to contact your supervisor, the man said calmly. I would strongly recommend it. Ethan sighed, adjusting the mirror. You keep saying that like it is supposed to impress me. It is not meant to impress you, came the quiet reply. It is meant to protect everyone involved. Ethan shook his head and started the engine. That sounds like something every lawyer tells people to say. The man looked back out the window. Perhaps. The patrol vehicle rolled away from the quiet neighborhood while the morning traffic slowly began filling the streets. A delivery truck passed in the opposite direction. Children waited at a nearby school bus stop. Life continued as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet only a few miles away, inside a secure federal operations center, a different kind of morning was beginning. A communications officer stared at a blinking notification that refused to clear from the screen. The location beacon assigned to Director Marcus Bennett had stopped transmitting its normal travel pattern. Within seconds another alert appeared beside it, marked with the highest internal priority. Several analysts exchanged confused looks before one reached for a direct emergency line. The call was answered almost immediately. No one raised their voice. No one panicked. Every instruction was delivered with practiced precision. Vehicles were assigned. Personnel were notified. Secure channels activated one after another with remarkable speed. Meanwhile, Ethan continued driving toward the station, unaware that multiple federal databases had already begun confirming the identity of the man seated quietly behind him. Back inside the patrol vehicle, Marcus Bennett listened to the steady rhythm of the tires against the pavement. He had spent decades teaching agents that leadership was measured not by the ability to command authority, but by the discipline to remain composed when authority was misused. Today, that lesson was no longer theoretical. His phone continued vibrating inside his jacket pocket, unanswered but certainly not unnoticed. Ethan heard the faint buzzing once again and glanced into the mirror. Who keeps calling you? He asked. Marcus answered with the same composed expression he had worn since the beginning. People who are probably wondering why I have not arrived yet. Ethan chuckled softly and turned into the station parking lot, completely unaware that several black sport utility vehicles had already changed direction and were now closing the distance with every passing mile. The station lobby carried the familiar rhythm of another ordinary weekday. Telephones rang in distant offices. Printers hummed behind half-open doors. Officers exchanged casual greetings while carrying paper cups filled with fresh coffee. No one paid much attention when Officer Ethan Walker escorted Marcus Bennett through the front entrance. To everyone watching, it appeared to be another routine detention. A few curious glances followed them before conversations quickly resumed. Marcus walked without resistance, his posture straight, his expression composed. Even after the long drive, there was no trace of frustration on his face. Instead, he quietly observed everything around him. The photographs hanging on the walls. The department awards displayed inside polished glass cases. The mission statement framed near the reception desk that spoke about integrity, fairness, and service to every member of the community. His eyes rested on those words for a brief moment before moving on. Ethan noticed the glance and smiled faintly. Funny reading, is it? Marcus answered calmly. No. Important reading. Ethan led him into a small interview room furnished with little more than a table, several chairs, and bright overhead lights. He removed the handcuffs according to procedure and stepped back toward the doorway. Marcus gently rubbed his wrists before sitting down without being asked. He folded his hands together on the table, appearing more like a guest waiting for a scheduled meeting than someone under investigation. Ethan leaned against the doorframe. Now we can finally figure out who you really are. Marcus looked at him with the same steady expression. I already told you. Ethan shook his head. Anyone can make claims. Marcus nodded once. That is true. The answer frustrated Ethan more than an argument would have. He expected excuses, complaints, or demands for legal representation. Instead, every response arrived with measured patience that quietly shifted the balance of the conversation. Outside the room, a records clerk began searching for identification using the information Marcus had provided. After several moments, she frowned at her computer screen. The database returned a restricted access notification unlike anything she had seen before. She tried again, carefully checking every letter. The same message appeared. Access denied. Federal authorization required. Assuming it was a technical problem, she contacted the Information Technology Office. They suggested refreshing the system. Nothing changed. Down the hallway, Ethan completed routine paperwork while occasionally glancing toward the interview room through the narrow window in the door. Marcus remained exactly where he had been, sitting calmly with quiet confidence, almost as though he knew time itself was working in his favor. His jacket rested neatly across the back of the chair. The phone inside continued vibrating every few minutes before falling silent again. Finally, the station lieutenant approached Ethan with a puzzled expression. "Walker, your detainee's information is creating problems in the system." Ethan barely looked up from his paperwork. Probably another fake identity. The lieutenant hesitated. "Maybe. But I have never seen our system refuse to identify someone like this." Ethan shrugged. "Then we wait until it clears." Neither man noticed the dispatcher suddenly remove her headset after receiving an unexpected priority notification. Her eyes widened as she reread the message appearing across her monitor. She immediately stood and hurried toward the lieutenant, lowering her voice as she spoke. The room around them slowly grew quieter. Conversations became shorter. Curious eyes shifted toward the hallway leading to the interview room. Outside, through the station windows, the first black sport utility vehicle rolled silently into the parking lot, followed by another, and then another, each arriving with calm precision rather than urgency. Whatever ordinary morning everyone believed they were having had quietly come to an end. The atmosphere inside the station changed so gradually that no one could point to the exact moment it happened. One conversation faded into silence. Another ended halfway through a sentence. Officers who had been laughing only moments earlier now found themselves glancing toward the front entrance without understanding why. The dispatcher quietly handed the printed notification to the lieutenant, who read it twice before looking toward the interview room. His confident expression gave way to uncertainty. "Walker," he called, keeping his voice low. "Come here for a second." Ethan stepped into a hallway, still carrying the confidence that had guided him all morning. "What is it?" The lieutenant hesitated before speaking. "Federal Communications have requested immediate confirmation on the identity of your detainee." Ethan folded his arms. "Tell them we are still processing him. It is not a request for an update," the lieutenant replied carefully. "It sounds more like they already know who he is." Ethan dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "Then they can wait like everyone else." Inside the interview room, Marcus Bennett remained seated exactly as before. His attention drifted toward the framed clock on the wall. 8:23 in the morning? He quietly calculated the distance from Washington, the average travel time under emergency authorization, and the efficiency of the people responsible for locating him. Experience had taught him that disciplined professionals rarely wasted a single minute. He knew they would arrive soon. Outside, another black sport utility vehicle rolled silently into the parking lot, followed by two more. Their dark windows reflected the morning sunlight as they parked with deliberate precision. No flashing lights. No sirens. No dramatic entrance. Just quiet confidence. A patrol officer standing near the front desk noticed the growing line of identical vehicles and frowned. "Lieutenant," he said softly, "you should probably take a look outside." Several officers walked toward the glass entrance doors. Through the windows they saw men and women wearing dark business attire stepping out one by one. Some carried slim folders. Others wore discreet earpieces barely visible beneath neatly trimmed hair. Every movement was calm, coordinated, and purposeful. None appeared hurried because none needed to be. The parking lot itself seemed to fall silent. Ethan joined the small group at the entrance and looked outside. "Who are they?" No one answered. Then another vehicle arrived unlike the others. It carried official federal government plates. The moment it stopped, a woman in a navy suit stepped out, adjusted her identification wallet beneath her jacket, and calmly surveyed the building before speaking into a small communication device clipped near her collar. Within seconds, every member of the arriving team subtly changed position as though responding to an invisible signal. Back inside the interview room, Marcus heard the faint sound of vehicle doors closing outside. His expression did not change, but a nearly imperceptible smile crossed his face for only a moment. Across the hallway, the records clerk suddenly hurried toward the lieutenant carrying a freshly printed report. "Sir," she whispered, "the restricted file just updated." He accepted the document, scanning the first line before his face lost all remaining color. His eyes immediately lifted toward Ethan. "Open that door," he said quietly. Ethan frowned. "Why?" The lieutenant never looked away from the report. "Because if this document is accurate, every second we delay makes this situation worse." Before Ethan could respond, 3 measured knocks echoed through the station's front entrance. No one rushed to answer. Every officer in the lobby seemed to stop breathing at the same time as the woman in the navy suit waited patiently outside, holding her federal credentials where everyone inside could clearly see them. The lieutenant walked to the front entrance himself, drawing a slow breath before unlocking the glass door. The woman waiting outside offered a courteous nod and presented her federal credentials with practiced confidence. "Good morning," she said evenly. "Special Agent Rebecca Collins. We are here regarding Director Marcus Bennett." The words landed with surprising weight. No one spoke for several seconds. The officers standing nearby exchanged uncertain glances, each silently hoping they had misunderstood what they had just heard. The lieutenant examined the credentials carefully before returning them. "Director?" he asked quietly. "That is correct," Rebecca answered. "Director Marcus Bennett has failed to arrive for a classified briefing in Washington. His secure location signal indicates that he is currently inside this building." Ethan Walker stepped forward before anyone else could respond. "If you are referring to the man we brought in this morning, we are still verifying his identity." Rebecca turned toward him without the slightest sign of irritation. "Verification has already been completed through multiple federal systems." Ethan folded his arms. "Our records did not immediately confirm that. Because access to his profile is intentionally restricted," Rebecca replied. "Those protections exist for operational security." Her calm explanation somehow made the room feel even quieter. Behind her, several additional federal personnel entered only after receiving a subtle nod. None raised their voices. None attempted to take control of the station. Instead, they waited with remarkable patience, allowing local leadership every opportunity to respond appropriately. The lieutenant looked back toward the interview room, then lowered his voice. "Has Director Bennett requested legal counsel?" Rebecca gave a faint smile. "Director Bennett understands procedure better than anyone in this building. If he has remained cooperative, I suspect he intends to let the facts speak for themselves." At the far end of the hallway, Marcus remained seated exactly where Ethan had left him. He noticed footsteps approaching but did not immediately look toward the door. Instead, he adjusted the sleeve of his jacket and glanced once more at the clock. 8:31. Almost precisely when he expected. The interview room door opened slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, no longer carrying the same certainty that had filled his voice earlier that morning. Marcus looked up with the same composed expression. "Good morning, officer." Ethan hesitated before speaking. "There are some people here asking for you." Marcus offered a polite nod. "I imagined they would arrive eventually." The simple answer lingered in the room. It contained no satisfaction, no sarcasm, and no accusation. Outside the interview room, Rebecca Collins waited patiently until Marcus stepped into the hallway. The moment she saw him, she straightened slightly and offered a respectful greeting. "Good morning, Director Bennett." Every conversation inside the station stopped. Every pair of eyes shifted toward the man many had assumed was simply another detainee. Several federal agents quietly acknowledged him with professional respect, not exaggerated ceremony but the unmistakable recognition reserved for a trusted leader. Marcus returned each greeting with a calm nod before looking toward the lieutenant. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said gently. "I believe we now have an opportunity to understand exactly how this misunderstanding occurred." His voice remained steady and measured, yet those words carried more weight than any raised voice could have achieved. In that single moment, the balance inside the station shifted completely. The assumptions that had guided the morning began giving way to uncomfortable questions, and for the first time since sunrise, Officer Ethan Walker realized that the story he thought had ended with a routine arrest was only beginning to reveal its true consequences. Marcus Bennett stood quietly in the center of the hallway as every eye in the station settled on him. No announcement had been made. No dramatic introduction was necessary. Respect revealed itself in the smallest gestures. Federal agents who had entered moments earlier instinctively stepped aside, creating a clear path without being instructed. Special Agent Rebecca Collins handed Marcus the phone that had been secured with his personal belongings. "Director, Washington has been attempting to reach you." Marcus accepted it with a grateful nod before placing a brief call. "This is Bennett. I am safe. There has been a misunderstanding at a local department. I will provide a full report after I conclude matters here." His calm tone never changed. Within seconds, the call ended. He slipped the phone back into his pocket as though nothing extraordinary had happened. The silence inside the station only deepened. Officer Ethan Walker remained frozen a few feet away, replaying every decision he had made that morning. Every assumption now felt heavier than the one before it. The questions he had dismissed. The request for a supervisor. The quiet confidence he had mistaken for defiance. They returned to him one by one with uncomfortable clarity. The lieutenant finally stepped forward. "Director Bennett, on behalf of this department, I would like to express my sincere apology for what has occurred today." Marcus looked at him thoughtfully before answering. "Lieutenant, I appreciate your professionalism. But apologies should never be the end of accountability. They should be the beginning of understanding." No one challenged his words. They were delivered without anger, yet they carried undeniable authority. Rebecca Collins opened a slim folder and placed several documents on the front desk. "These are the official identity confirmations requested by your records division," she explained. "They include travel authorization, security credentials, and verification through the Department of Justice." The records clerk glanced through the paperwork, her face growing increasingly pale with every page. Every document confirmed exactly who Marcus Bennett was. Every security seal matched. Every signature was authentic. There had never been any uncertainty except the one created by assumptions. Outside, more federal personnel remained in the parking lot, speaking quietly among themselves while avoiding unnecessary attention. There were no flashing lights, no media, and no public spectacle. The purpose was not embarrassment. It was accuracy. Marcus slowly turned toward Ethan. Their eyes met for several long seconds. Ethan opened his mouth, searching for words that refused to come. Finally he spoke. "Sir, I believed I was doing my job." Marcus nodded gently. "I believe you thought that." Ethan swallowed hard. "I should have listened when you asked me to contact my supervisor," Marcus answered with complete honesty. "That would have changed the course of this entire morning." The statement was neither cruel nor forgiving. It was simply true. Around them, officers quietly reflected on their own responsibilities. They had all watched events unfold. Some had questioned them privately. None had interrupted them publicly. Marcus understood that accountability rarely belonged to one person alone. Before anyone else could speak, another federal official entered carrying a sealed envelope marked Internal Review. Rebecca accepted it, read the first page, and then looked toward Marcus. "Director, the Civil Rights Division and the Office of Professional Responsibility have both requested immediate coordination with this department." Marcus gave a slight nod. "Then let us make sure every fact is documented carefully. Justice is strongest when it is built upon truth rather than emotion." Those words settled over the station like a quiet promise, and for the first time that morning, everyone present understood that the most important investigation had not just ended. It had only begun. The conference room had been prepared within minutes, yet no one seemed eager to take a seat. The polished wooden table that usually hosted routine briefings now held neatly arranged folders from multiple agencies, each representing another layer of oversight that had quietly arrived without warning. Marcus Bennett entered with the same measured pace he had maintained throughout the morning. He thanked the lieutenant for providing the room before taking a seat near the center of the table rather than at its head. It was a small decision, but everyone noticed it. Leadership, he believed, was demonstrated through actions long before titles were mentioned. Special Agent Rebecca Collins organized several documents while representatives from the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Civil Rights Division joined the discussion through a secure video connection. The atmosphere remained calm, professional, and deliberate. There was no interest in assigning blame before understanding the facts. Every participant understood that credibility depended upon discipline. The lieutenant addressed the room first. "Director Bennett, our department is prepared to cooperate fully with every review." Marcus acknowledged him with a slight nod. "That is the appropriate first step. Transparency protects both the public and the officers who serve with integrity." Ethan Walker stood quietly near the back wall. He had removed his patrol cap and held it in both hands, listening to every word without interruption. The confidence that had defined him only hours earlier had been replaced by reflection. Marcus turned toward him. "Officer Walker, would you describe what led to your decision this morning?" Ethan hesitated before answering. "I received a report about a suspicious person and a vehicle that appeared out of place. When I arrived, I relied too heavily on my first impression instead of slowing down and verifying the information." Marcus listened without expression. "Did Mr. Bennett cooperate?" the Civil Rights Division representative asked through the monitor. Ethan answered immediately. "Yes. Completely." "Did he request that you contact a supervisor?" "Yes." "Did he resist your instructions?" Ethan lowered his eyes. "No." The room fell silent again. No accusation was necessary because the answers themselves painted a complete picture. Marcus finally spoke. "Every officer will eventually face moments when incomplete information demands careful judgment. The difference between professionalism and error is often measured by the willingness to pause before reaching a conclusion." The lieutenant quietly nodded. Several officers around the table exchanged thoughtful glances, recognizing that the lesson applied far beyond a single incident. Rebecca Collins then presented a timeline assembled from dispatch records, body camera timestamps, radio traffic, and witness statements. Every event aligned with remarkable precision. There were no missing hours, no unexplained gaps, only a sequence of decisions that became increasingly difficult to defend once viewed together. Marcus reviewed the summary before closing the folder. "Facts deserve patience," he said. "Assumptions demand speed. This morning, speed defeated patience." No one attempted to disagree. Through the conference room window, officers continued their normal duties in the hallway, but the station no longer felt quite the same. Conversations had become more thoughtful. Procedures were being double-checked. Supervisors quietly reminded younger officers to verify before acting. A single morning had already begun changing the culture inside the building. Marcus rose from his chair and looked around the room one final time. "This review is not about humiliating anyone. It is about strengthening public trust. If we learn honestly from today, then today will not be remembered for a mistake. It will be remembered for what that mistake taught every one of us." As the meeting adjourned, the silence that followed no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt purposeful, carrying the quiet realization that true authority is never proven by control over others, but by the courage to face the truth when it finally arrives. When the meeting concluded, Marcus Bennett did not hurry toward the waiting vehicles outside. Instead, he asked if he could spend a few more minutes inside the station. The request surprised everyone. Most people expected him to leave immediately, surrounded by federal personnel and protected by official protocol. Instead, he walked slowly through the main hallway, pausing beneath the framed photographs of former chiefs and community events that lined the walls. He studied each image carefully, recognizing the years of service represented by every smiling face. This department has done good work for this community, he said quietly. One difficult morning does not erase decades of honorable service. But one difficult morning should encourage every department to become even better tomorrow. Those words settled deeply among the officers standing nearby. They had expected criticism. Instead, they were hearing responsibility paired with hope. The lieutenant joined Marcus near the community service display where local children had written handwritten thank you notes to officers during the previous holiday season. Marcus smiled gently as he read one of the colorful messages. This is why trust matters, he said. Children believe these uniforms represent fairness long before they understand the law. We have a duty to make certain they are correct. The lieutenant nodded slowly. I understand that more clearly today than I did yesterday. Across the room, Officer Ethan Walker remained silent, watching the conversation from several feet away. He understood that no formal investigation could weigh more heavily than the realization growing inside him. His greatest mistake had not been a lack of courage or effort. It had been allowing assumptions to replace careful judgment. Marcus eventually turned toward him. Officer Walker, may I ask you one question? Ethan answered immediately. Of course, sir. Marcus looked at him with calm sincerity. If you encountered the same situation tomorrow, knowing only what you knew before this morning, what would you do differently? Ethan reflected for several long seconds before answering. I would slow down. I would ask more questions than I answered for myself. I would verify before concluding. And I would remember that respect costs nothing, even during an investigation. Marcus offered a small nod. Then today has already produced something valuable. Rebecca Collins quietly observed the exchange without interrupting. She had worked beside Marcus for years and knew that moments like this revealed his true leadership. He never sought victory over another person. He sought improvement within the institution itself. Outside, several federal vehicles had already departed, their responsibilities complete. Only a few remained, waiting without urgency. Reporters had not gathered. Cameras had not appeared. There would be no dramatic headlines before the facts were properly documented. That, Marcus believed, was exactly how justice should operate. Before leaving, he addressed the officers one final time. Public confidence is earned one interaction at a time. Every conversation, every traffic stop, every question asked with patience rather than assumption strengthens the relationship between law enforcement and the communities they serve. The badge represents authority, but it also represents restraint, humility, and accountability. Those qualities cannot be written into policy alone. They must be practiced every day. The room remained completely silent after he finished speaking. No applause followed. None was needed. The lesson carried more weight because it had been delivered without anger and accepted without argument. As Marcus walked toward the front entrance, the morning sunlight streamed through the glass doors, illuminating the station lobby with a quiet warmth that had been absent only hours earlier. Behind him, officers returned to their duties with renewed purpose, each carrying away the same simple realization that justice is not measured by how quickly authority acts, but by how faithfully it chooses truth over assumption. Marcus Bennett stepped through the station doors and paused for a moment beneath the clear morning sky. The air felt different now, not because the weather had changed, but because the weight everyone carried inside the building had begun to shift. The line of black sport utility vehicles remained waiting quietly along the curb, their engines idling softly. Special Agent Rebecca Collins approached and opened the rear passenger door, but Marcus did not get in immediately. Instead, he turned back toward the station one last time. Through the glass entrance he could see officers returning to their desks, dispatchers answering calls, and supervisors quietly speaking with their teams. The work of serving the community had already resumed, but it would never be exactly the same as it had been only a few hours earlier. Officer Ethan Walker slowly walked outside, stopping several feet away. His patrol uniform looked exactly as it had that morning, yet something about him had undeniably changed. Confidence had given way to humility. Assumption had given way to reflection. He removed his cap and held it respectfully in front of him. Director Bennett, he said sincerely, I cannot change what happened today. But I can choose what kind of officer I become because of it. Marcus studied him for a quiet moment before answering. Every public servant faces defining days. Some are remembered because everything goes right. Others are remembered because they reveal where growth is needed. Character is not measured by avoiding every mistake. It is measured by what a person chooses after recognizing one. Ethan nodded slowly. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to learn instead of only condemning me. Marcus offered a faint smile. Learning is the only way institutions improve. Accountability without growth accomplishes very little. Accountability that leads to wisdom protects people long after a single day has passed. The lieutenant stepped outside as well, extending his hand. Marcus accepted it warmly. Our department will cooperate fully with every review, the lieutenant said. More importantly, we will examine our training, our procedures, and the assumptions that influence our decisions. Marcus replied. Then today will have served a purpose far greater than correcting one misunderstanding. As he entered the waiting vehicle, Rebecca Collins quietly closed the door behind him. The convoy pulled away from the station without flashing lights, without celebration, and without spectacle. There was no victory to announce because justice had never been about defeating another person. It had always been about restoring trust. Inside the station, Ethan returned to the hallway where the morning had first begun. His eyes settled once more on the framed mission statement mounted near the entrance. The words had not changed, but their meaning had. Integrity. Fairness. Service. They were no longer simply ideals printed beneath the department's seal. They had become responsibilities that demanded action every single day. Weeks later, updated training sessions were introduced throughout the department, emphasizing verification, communication, and impartial decision-making. New recruits heard the story not as a tale of embarrassment, but as a reminder that professionalism begins with listening before judging. Experienced officers reflected upon it as well, recognizing that even years of service never remove the obligation to question one's own assumptions. Somewhere in Washington, Marcus Bennett continued leading with the same quiet discipline that had carried him through that extraordinary morning. He never spoke publicly about the incident because he believed the greatest lessons did not require headlines. They required people willing to remember them. And perhaps that is the truest measure of justice. It does not arrive to satisfy pride or fuel revenge. It arrives to remind every person that dignity belongs to everyone, truth is stronger than assumption, and the strongest authority is always the one humble enough to protect both.